Coming up today, in a nationally televised speech, President Park Geun-hye urges the country to get behind her administration's structural reform drive for the sake of the economy. Korea's political parties are pressuring Lotte Group to submit more detailed information on its ownership structure as public criticism grows over the conglomerate's shadowy corporate governance. Plus, heatwave warnings are issued as much of Korea continues to swelter, with temperatures forecast to soar up to an almost unbearable 37 degrees Celsius in some parts of the country today. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 6th of August. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Now, as she approaches the midpoint of her 5-year term in office later this month, President Park Geun-hye addressed the nation earlier today, laying out how she plans to run the country in the second half of her presidency. She sought public support for the 4 areas she is targeting for reform, namely the public, labour, finance and education sectors. For more details, we connect to our presidential office correspondent, Choi Yu-sun.
Well, emphasizing that the next 3 to 4 years will be a watershed to the securing soundness of the Korean economy, President Park called on the Korean people to participate in the government's efforts to carry out a set of structural reforms. Referring to the unemployment rate among the country's young people surpassing 10%, the president urged the called for public support for a wage peak system of reducing salaries to hire more new workers, urging members of the older generation to give way to young people. She said addressing the youth unemployment issue would be key to resolving economic and social fallouts from Korea's fast-aging, low-birth society. President Park then called for fairness and flexibility in the labor market, determining employment and wages based on a worker's ability and achievement, and not solely based on job security or how long the worker has been employed. Mark?
And Yu-sun, the tripartite dialogue between Labour management and the government on reforms has been stuck in an impasse since April after they failed to reach a compromise on a number of issues, including the wage peak system. Now, Labour unions say the system will not be effective in resolving the problem of youth unemployment. Can we expect the 3 parties to return to talks after the president's remarks today?
Well, Mark, it remains to be certain when the parties will return to negotiations, since they haven't been able to narrow their differences. But President Park today, she talked about implementing the wage peak system in public institutions by the end of this year, rather. She also called on the parties to resume negotiations while promising measures to boost the social safety net, such as raising unemployment benefits for the unemployed from the current 50 to 60% of their average wage, and supporting them find new jobs. President Park also talked about the other reform tasks at hand. Concerning the public sector, she vowed to unify projects that overlap between public institutions and to reduce overspending. In education, the president said she will seek to expand the system of allowing students to participate in non-academic activities of their interest to help them realize their dreams and potential. That's all for now. This is Choi Yu-sun reporting on President Park's national address to the nation, and I'll be back with more details in our next newscast.
Well, thank you very much, Yusan. That was our Chae-sun there reporting on the president's speech. And Korea's rival parties have issued their reactions to that speech. The ruling Saenuri Party has vowed to fully support the Park administration's drive to reform the nation's labour, public and finance sectors, as well as the education system. The party's leader, Kim Moo-sung, said he feels the same sense of urgency as the president to make the labour market more flexible, to create more jobs for young people who, he said, are the core of the nation's competitiveness. The main opposition party, the New Politics Alliance for Democracy, took a rather dimmer view. The party's spokesperson said the president's address was full of instructions, but there was no apology for the government's poor initial handling of the MERS outbreak or the surveillance allegations surrounding the spy agency. The NPAD says that given the intensifying feud at the top of Lotte Group, reforming Korea's family-run conglomerates is a more pressing issue than shaking up the labour market in general. Now, Korea's two main rival parties are moving to reform the country's family-run conglomerates amid this public backlash against an escalating brotherly battle at Lotte Group. The ruling party and the government are seeking to devise measures to improve how private business groups, known as in Korean as chaebol, are run. The ruling party's chief policymaker has asked Lotte to submit the details of its complex ownership structure by the end of the month. The main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, plans to propose a bill that would compel the conglomerates to reduce cross-sharing practices among their affiliates. Korea's current fair trade law bans new cross-sharing arrangements, but not existing ones. And staying on the topic of big business, the heads of Korea's top 10 conglomerates control their companies with just a handful of shares, relatively speaking. According to data compiled by industry tracker chaebol.com, the heads of Samsung, Hyundai Motor and Doosan own just 0.25% of the shares in their group's affiliates on average. The latest Lotte succession battle and the government's investigation into its corporate governance structure has heightened scrutiny of the shareholding structures of Korea's conglomerates. Lotte Group founder Shin Gyok-ho has only a 0.05% share in the company, but the cross-sharing practice has made it possible for him to control the company. Now, it has emerged that the Japanese government was notified of Mitsubishi Materials' plan to apologize to American POWs forced into labor during World War II before the apology was issued last month. The news seems to reaffirm earlier speculation the Japanese government was in fact involved in the apology. Connie Kim reports.
Prominent Japanese firm Mitsubishi Materials notified the government of its plan to apologize to American prisoners of war last month. Seoul-based Yonhap news agency reported Thursday on the comment made by Yukio Okamoto, an advisor to Japan-based Mitsubishi Materials Corporation, raising speculation that Mitsubishi Materials had gotten permission for the apology from the government. Okamoto also made clear that the apology was solely extended by Mitsubishi and said the government has previously reaffirmed that it had already apologized to prisoners of war for their brutal treatment during wartime and it has no plans to compensate them. Last month, the Japanese firm issued a formal apology for using American POWs as slave laborers during World War II. In response, the Japanese embassy in Washington had said the apology was made solely on the Japanese firm's initiative and that the government was not involved. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga refrained from commenting on the matter. In his remarks, Okamoto drew a fine line between the prisoners of war and the tens of thousands of Korean victims of the forced labor program. Okamoto said Koreans were technically Japanese citizens during Japan's colonial rule. Their situation was totally different from that of the American POWs. An estimated 6,500 Koreans were forced into labor at Mitsubishi's affiliates, with more than 4,000 forced to work at Mitsubishi Mining, the predecessor of Mitsubishi Materials. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Officials from Korea and the United States are conducting a joint on-site inspection of the Osan Air Base after a live anthrax sample was mistakenly sent there back in April. The group is investigating how the anthrax sample came into the base and the steps that were taken thereafter, including the sample's disposal. The Defence Ministry says the visit is aimed at calming public concerns by having first-hand verification about whether appropriate safety measures were taken at the facility. The erroneous shipment has raised calls in Korea for the government to have much tighter oversight of biological agents brought into the country by the US military. There has been yet another migrant boat disaster in the Mediterranean Sea. A fishing boat carrying up to 600 people capsized some 25 kilometers off the coast of Libya on Wednesday morning local time, leaving some 200 people missing. Around 400 people were rescued, but 25 have been confirmed dead. The Italian Coast Guard says it received a distress call from the boat when weather conditions suddenly made a turn for the worst. Officials say that when the rescue vessel arrived at the scene, the migrants rushed to one side in a desperate attempt to get to safety, causing the boat to capsize. Now, this year alone, more than 2,000 migrants are believed to have died trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. The Prime Minister of Malaysia has confirmed that a wing fragment recently found on an island in a remote part of the Indian Ocean is from the missing plane MH370. After so many false leads, the confirmation marks the first breakthrough in the search for the jet that remains one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. Son Jung-in reports.
In a televised statement, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak said there was now physical evidence that Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 tragically ended in the southern Indian Ocean in March last year.
Today, 515 days since the plane disappeared, it is with a very heavy heart that I must tell you that an international team of experts have conclusively confirmed that the aircraft debris found on Reunion Island is indeed from MH370.
The conclusion was reached after a joint team of experts from France, Malaysia, and Australia, along with representatives from Boeing, examined the barnacle-covered piece of debris. The Prime Minister said the confirmation was a major breakthrough in resolving the mystery that has bemused the world for almost 18 months. He also stressed that his government was committed to finding out what exactly happened to the plane. But the latest finding was not enough to satisfy relatives of the victims who still have many unresolved questions.
There must be more debris to be found. Yeah, don't just show that one piece of reference. That's not enough at all.
Officials say that unless the plane's data recorders are found, it would be difficult to get any concrete answers. The Malaysia Airlines jet vanished en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing in March 2014 with 239 passengers and crew on board. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, Korea, like any other country, is going to look quite a lot different in 10 years' time. The low birth rate means society as a whole is aging. There's the serious issue of ensuring there are enough decent jobs, not to mention the environmental changes taking place. In order to be ready for what lies ahead, the government has, for the first time, identified the 10 biggest issues Korea will face in the year 2025. Song Ji-sun reports.
What will be the 10 most important issues facing Korea 1 decade from now? After analyzing data and surveys from 1,500 experts and college students, Korea's Science Ministry has announced the top 10 trends for 2025 based on their projected influence and how likely they are to happen. A low birth rate coupled with a super age society means the number of elderly people supported by those of working age will rise sharply as time goes by. Now, inequality is another concern. The Gini coefficient, symbolizing income disparity, is getting larger by the year. Insecure living conditions will persist as well. This is indicated by the fact that people are choosing to get married at an older age, as saving money and bringing up children seems to become more difficult by the day. On top of that, there's the problem of unstable employment. Companies are recruiting fewer people compared to the number of job seekers. And cross-border disputes about men's effect on the environment will likely intensify. For example, the Korean peninsula is suffering more and more each year from the yellow dust flowing from China. There will be a rising number of cyber crimes, and the depletion of energy and natural resources is projected to worsen. A steady stream of provocations by North Korea is also forecast. Climate change and natural disasters linked to global warming is one issue that needs international cooperation. The Korean government will also need to shift its economic strategy to try and counter the nation's shrinking growth potential as the population ages. Now, using the results of this report, the government will identify the most pressing issues and formulate measures to enable us to better prepare for life in the future. 송지선, Arirang News.
Now, before we go, we'll leave you with a brief look at the weather, and summer has truly found its stride in Korea now. Heatwave warnings have been issued for most of the country, with afternoon highs expected to easily top 30 degrees Celsius. That includes Seoul and southern regions, including the city of Daegu, which is expected to see a high of 37 degrees Celsius today. There will be clear sunny skies in most regions due to a high-pressure system from the North Pacific. Now, Korea's weather agency says it's keeping an eye on Earth's strongest cyclone of 2015, Super Typhoon Sodulor, in case it diverts from its course, which currently sees it making landfall in Taiwan late Friday local time. But it is huge. It could potentially have an effect on Korea. With that, let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all we have now. I'm Mark Broome. Have a great day, and thank you, as always, for watching. We do hope to see you at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.